I am Frederick Schreiber, and I am the Vice President and Executive Producer at 3D Realms.
So talk about Iron Maiden, Ion Fury. I called it Ion Maiden. Talk about Ion Fury. Where did the idea for this game come from?
Well, the idea came back in 2014. We were doing a game called Bombshell, which is the first entry in this IP, this series. And that was a modern, realistic looking game. And we thought, you know what, we would love to create a backstory for this character. And if we're creating a game that takes place before Bombshell, why don't we make it look like it was made before Bombshell? And at this point, we're big fans of the classic 3D Realms games, Duke Nukem 3D, Shadow Warrior, and also Blood and Ruins, which became Power Slave and Exhumed, was started by 3D Realms as well back in the 90s. We're huge fans of these games. So we thought, you know what, let's go back to basics. Let's make another game in the build engine, the engine that powered these classic titles. So that's basically how it started. We started out with a concept phase, figuring out, what should the game be about, what's the backstory, where should it take place, and then the biggest challenge arose. Who the hell still knows how to make games using the build engine, because it's ancient technology. No one has made a game in 20 plus years in this engine. So we reached out to a community of mappers and modders who are making maps and mods for Shadow Warrior and Duke Nukem still to this day. They still exist. It's a small group, but they still exist. And ask them, hey, we have this idea. Would you guys like to make a real official 3D Realms game, the next game in the series of Duke Nukem, Shadow Warrior, and so on? They said yes, and that's how it started.
So as technology evolves, making games easier and easier to make, and the tools more and more accessible, was it more challenging to go backwards than it was to have modern tools to make this game?
Absolutely. So it's a weird mix of using modern tools and old school tools. So first of all, the way the game is programmed and the way the maps are made is exactly the same way as back in the 90s. So it puts a ton of limitations. I believe that you create fantastic things when you have to work under certain limitations. You pay much more attention to the details. You're trying to break rules to make something incredible. That's the first aspect. The second is the way the assets and the graphics are made in a game like this are basically made like what they did in the old days. A game like Doom, for instance, whenever they made the characters and weapons and so on for Doom, they couldn't model them because they had no modeling software on a computer. So they, did sculptures on a clay and then took pictures of them for each frame and then put them into the computer and cleaned them up. That's basically the same process for this, but instead of modeling the models in clay, we model them on the computer, but we still take pictures from all the sides, put them into the computer, and then we clean up the graphics and make it all look nice. So the process is still kind of the same, but slightly more digitized, but it takes just as long. So it's made in the old school way, using the old school tools, but with a little modification to make it a bit easier, but it is still very tough. If you make an example of how to make a weapon in a modern game, you make a high poly model and then you bake it into low poly and make all the textures, and all that takes a long time. Here, you kind of do the same, but since it's all based on sprites and just a few frames of animation, it's all 2D graphics, you have to manually paint in every single pixel to make it look really, really nice for every single frame of animation. So it's still a very long process, but a very different process, and a process that's kind of ancient now. No one does this anymore, so a lot of these people have to learn this from scratch again.
So here's an interesting question. Could you take the code for your game, the source code, and travel back in time to like 1995 and let it run on a computer?
Yes and no. So here's the thing. The actual code itself, the way it's put together, would run, but there's so much more of it now. So the way the scripts work, the way, whenever something happens in a level, the way that's written is the same way as it was back in the day. But now there's just so much more stuff happening. So it's basically a supercharged build engine game. It would not run at all. It would probably make an old computer blow up. And the levels are, 10 times larger than they were back in the day. Like all these things,
The frames are, there's a lot more frames in the weapon animations I'm noticing too. So.
Yeah, a few more frames there, and more enemies, better AI, those things add up. So it probably wouldn't run. You could load it up, probably, but I don't think you'd get a smooth frame rate.
We're getting a lot of resurgence from the old first-person shooters. I mean, Doom just released on basically all platforms, 1, 2, and 3, and now Ion Fury, of course, is out now. Talk about, what do you think it is about these games that have them withstand the test of time?
Well, I think that, so the old games that are getting re-releases, I think that really shows that the demographic that played these games when they were kids miss them, and they miss them on new platforms. And I also think it allows brand new gamers who never actually got to play these old games in the first place get a new chance. It's fun to see how, if you look at the younger demographic who are used to play Call of Duty and Fortnite and Apex and so on, who didn't grow up these games, are slowly getting into them, because then they play something modern like Doom 2016. They're like, wow, this is a different type of game, and in reality it's actually a game that feels a lot like the first Doom.
Right.
And then they go from that to see, okay, there was another Doom, and now it came out on the Switch, let me try that. Oh, this has old school graphics. Actually, a fun little anecdote, we asked at a convention, we had people play Iron Fury, there's a lot of kids playing it. And we asked them, hey, what do you think about this game looking old and old school? They had no idea what I was talking about, because for them, old school was Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 and Gears of War 4.
Yeah.
Because these guys, they're 8, and Gears of War 4 came out 4 years ago, so they remember when they were kids. So their idea of these graphics is like with Minecraft. It's just a style. It's not old or new. They had no idea what I was talking about. So they just thought that this is just the style we picked, and they just loved the game. It was really fast and really challenging, and so that's really fun that there's a generation in between us and the young kids who still know that this is looking old, but otherwise, most of the young kids playing these games nowadays don't know this is old school graphics. They just think, oh, this looks cool, it's a different art style.
You also made this game with more of the general, larger user base in mind. For example, funny Duke Nukem 3D story. I used to play it on my dad's computer. My mom walked in when I was pressing spacebar, giving money to a stripper, and she's like, "Turn that game off!" Yeah. So I was never allowed to play it again. But this game, you take a it's still violent, but a more family-friendly approach, I guess.
Yeah, in some way. She's not Duke Nukem. She's Shelley Harrison. She comes from a bit different background. Shelley Harrison is, she's a cop. She works for the Global Defense Forces, and she's a bomb defusal expert. So she comes from a completely different background, a different story. He's still super badass, still tongue-in-cheek. Throughout this game, you'll hear her one-liners become more and more sarcastic, and she starts to give less of a shit for anything that's happening because she becomes so mad, because she becomes so powerful and awesome. So she's more of this type of character who, at the end, doesn't really give a shit about anything. She just wants to kick, not alien ass, but cyborg ass. So she has some similarities to Duke Nukem, but she's still a very different character.
And I want to talk about the name for a minute, because it was originally called Ion Maiden, which is based off a weapon on an older game. You changed the name last minute to Ion Fury. Can you talk a little bit about that debacle and what you guys ended up doing with that?
Yeah, sure. So the name Ion Maiden was based on a weapon in the game Bombshell. There's some technology in that, there's some lore that connects that together. So I thought, you know what, this is the first weapon, this is the first game in the series. Let's call this game Ion Maiden. But we weren't really super attached to that name. It was just, it's a cool name, let's call it that and then see if that sticks. Then we got sued by Iron Maiden for the similarities, and we could have fought it, but we decided, it's not really worth it. The game was so close to release. We weren't that attached to the name itself. The name doesn't make the game. So we decided, let's just change the name, get this out there, because we think that it's more important for us to get this game into the hands of the fans that have been waiting 4.5 years for this, rather than go into a year-long lawsuit to keep a name and then keeping everyone away from actually getting to play it. So it was by far the best decision, and now people could actually play the game. So.